In the land of Bethlehem, during a time of severe famine, a man named Elimelech, along with his wife Naomi and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, left their home in search of a better life. They ventured to Moab, a foreign land, where survival seemed more possible. Naomi had hoped it would only be a temporary stay, but little did she know that this journey would mark the beginning of unimaginable loss. The years in Moab were not easy, but they were filled with moments of hope. Naomi's sons grew into young men, and they eventually married Moabite women. Orpah, a woman with gentle eyes and a compassionate heart, married Mahlon, and Ruth, a woman of strength and loyalty, married Chilion. Naomi, though far from her homeland, was beginning to feel as if life had granted her some semblance of peace. But fate, as it often does, took a cruel turn. Naomi's husband Elimelech passed away unexpectedly, leaving her a widow in a foreign land. Though it was a deep sorrow, Naomi held on to her sons, who were now her only family. She found solace in their companionship, and despite the loneliness that pervaded her life, she carried on for them. Years passed, and just when Naomi thought that perhaps her grief would ease, her two sons fell ill and died as well. The loss was overwhelming, and Naomi found herself alone in a foreign land with no husband and no children to care for her. Her heart was heavy, burdened by grief and confusion. She had come to Moab with her family in search of a better life, but now she was left with nothing. As Naomi grappled with her pain, the days became endless. She began to question everything, to wonder why such misfortune had befallen her. But amidst her despair, Naomi found a reason to hold on. Her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Though they were Moabites, they had become family, and Naomi loved them as if they were her own daughters. One day, after hearing that the famine in Bethlehem had ended and that there was food once more in her homeland, Naomi made the difficult decision to return home. She knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but she felt that perhaps it was time to return home and leave behind the land that had taken so much from her. Naomi turned to Orpah and Ruth, preparing to say goodbye. With a heavy heart, she urged them both to return to their families in Moab. "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house," Naomi said with a voice full of sorrow. "May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to me and my sons." Orpah, though reluctant, kissed Naomi's cheek and, with tears in her eyes, turned back to her family. Naomi, though heartbroken, understood that Orpah's path lay in Moab. But Ruth could not let Naomi go alone. She loved Naomi like a mother, and the thought of leaving her was unbearable. Ruth, with tears streaming down her face, clung to Naomi. "I will not leave you," Ruth said, her voice steady despite her pain. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." Naomi, overwhelmed by Ruth's loyalty and love, could not bear to part from her. Despite the sorrow in her heart, she knew that Ruth's devotion was a gift that would guide them through whatever lay ahead. Together, Naomi and Ruth set out on the long journey back to Bethlehem. Naomi did not know what awaited them, but she did know one thing. She could not return to Bethlehem with nothing. She had Ruth, her faithful daughter-in-law, by her side. And for now, that was enough. The journey back to Bethlehem was long and filled with uncertainty. Naomi and Ruth traveled quietly, the weight of the road pressing on them. The land around them was barren and dry, reflecting the sorrow that weighed heavily on Naomi's heart. It had been many years since she left, but in her mind, the memories of the past still lingered like a shadow, and the return to her homeland was bittersweet. As they neared the gates of Bethlehem,
Naomi felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The city, once familiar, now seemed foreign to her. It had changed over the years, and yet Naomi felt like a stranger in her own home. She had left with a full family, and now she returned with nothing but grief and the companionship of Ruth. The sight of the city brought a flood of memories. Naomi had once walked these streets with her husband and sons, and now the emptiness of their absence felt suffocating. She could hardly bring herself to go forward, but Ruth, walking quietly beside her, reminded Naomi that she was not alone. As they approached the city, word quickly spread that Naomi had returned. The women of the city, who remembered her well, gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing. "Is this Naomi?" they asked, their voices filled with surprise and curiosity. Naomi, hearing the chatter, stopped in her tracks. She turned to Ruth, her face filled with sorrow. "Don't call me Naomi," she said, her voice trembling. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, since the Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me?" The women who had gathered around her were silent for a moment, their faces filled with sympathy. They could see the depth of Naomi's pain, and they could feel her sorrow in the very air. But Ruth, standing beside Naomi, was a silent but powerful reminder that there was still love and hope in Naomi's life. Ruth had not abandoned her, even when Naomi had lost everything else. Naomi's words were a reflection of the bitterness she felt, but they also marked the beginning of her journey toward healing. Her sorrow was real, and she had every right to grieve. But Ruth, her loyal daughter-in-law, remained by her side, and through her, Naomi could sense that perhaps there was still a reason to live, even in the midst of her pain. That evening, as they entered the house that had once been Naomi's home, Ruth went out to the fields to gather leftover grain. It was the custom for the poor to collect what the harvesters had missed, and Ruth, despite being a foreigner, was determined to find something to offer Naomi. Meanwhile, Naomi, in the quiet of their home, found herself reflecting on everything that had brought her to this point. She remembered the happy days when her family had been whole, when they had laughed together around the dinner table. But those days seemed distant now, almost like a different life, a life that had been taken away. She was no longer the woman who had left Bethlehem full of hope and promise. She was now a woman who had returned empty, burdened by loss.
But as she sat in the silence, a small flicker of hope began to stir within her. Ruth's loyalty was a balm for her wounded heart. Naomi had not expected Ruth to follow her, but Ruth had chosen to stay, choosing Naomi over her own family, her own land, her own people. And for the first time in a long while, Naomi allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she could begin again. The next morning, Ruth returned with an unexpected bounty. She had gathered more than enough barley to feed both of them for days. When Naomi saw the grain, she asked, "Where did you gather this? Who took notice of you?" Ruth smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. "I worked in the fields of a man named Boaz. He was kind to me." Naomi's face softened at the mention of Boaz. "Boaz," she murmured, her mind beginning to work. Boaz was a relative of her late husband Elimelech. He was a man of wealth and standing in the community, and he was bound by law to offer protection to any family member in need. Could this be the turning point for them? "Blessed be he of the Lord," Naomi said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Boaz is one of our kinsman redeemers. Perhaps he will show us kindness." For the first time since her return to Bethlehem, Naomi allowed herself a small hope.
Ruth had found favor in Boaz's fields, and perhaps through him the door to their restoration was opening. But Naomi knew that there was more to be done. She had to take the next step, but for the first time it seemed that the future might not be as bleak as she had thought. Naomi began to formulate a plan, a way to approach Boaz and see if he would fulfill the duty of the kinsman redeemer. Ruth, though uncertain, was willing to trust Naomi, just as she had trusted her to lead her here. The two women, once filled with grief and uncertainty, now stood at the threshold of a new chapter. The road ahead was still unclear, but Naomi knew that with Ruth by her side and Boaz's potential help, they might just find their way. As Naomi sat quietly in their small home, her mind raced with possibilities. She had never imagined that the path ahead would be so fraught with difficulties, yet there was a glimmer of hope now that Boaz had shown kindness to Ruth. Naomi knew that Ruth's future, and by extension her own, depended on what happened next. Boaz was a man of integrity, a man bound by the laws of their people to redeem what had been lost. Naomi had to act, and she had to act swiftly. Turning to Ruth, Naomi spoke with a tone that was both firm and tender. "My daughter, I've been thinking. Boaz is a relative of ours, and he has shown favor to you, but we must take the next step. I want you to go to him tonight after he has finished his work on the threshing floor." Ruth, though hesitant, listened closely. Naomi continued, explaining the customs and the laws of the kinsman redeemer, and how, under the right circumstances, Boaz could take responsibility for their family. It was a custom that was both practical and deeply rooted in the tradition of their people. If Boaz agreed, he would marry Ruth, redeeming her family line and restoring their inheritance.
Tonight, after Boaz has finished eating and drinking, and when he lies down to rest, you must go to him, Naomi instructed. Wait until he falls asleep, then uncover his feet and lie down beside him. He will tell you what to do next. Ruth, though deeply nervous about such a bold move, trusted Naomi completely. She had followed her guidance from the very beginning and was determined to continue doing so. Naomi had led her through the darkest days of their lives, and now it seemed that her wisdom would lead them to the light. She nodded, her heart pounding with the weight of the task before her. "But, Mother," Ruth hesitated, "what if he refuses? What if he doesn't want to redeem me?" Naomi's eyes softened with understanding. "Then there is another kinsman redeemer closer than Boaz, and he will have the first right. But I have faith in Boaz. He is a man of honor, and he will not turn you away." That evening, Ruth took a deep breath, preparing herself for the night ahead. She bathed, put on her best cloak, and carefully made her way to the threshing floor, where the men would gather after the day's work was done. The cool evening air felt like a comforting embrace as she approached the site, the rhythmic sounds of the workers in the distance slowly fading away as she walked closer. As Ruth arrived at the threshing floor, she saw Boaz sitting by the pile of grain, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. The day had been long, and he had worked hard, but now he rested, exhausted from the harvest. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest as she approached him quietly, careful not to make any noise that would disturb him. Boaz was fast asleep, the sound of his breathing steady and peaceful. Ruth stood for a moment, gathering her courage. She slowly moved toward him, her hands trembling as she lifted the edge of his blanket and uncovered his feet just as Naomi had instructed. Then, with a deep breath, she lay down beside him, her body close but respectful, her heart racing with anticipation. In the quiet darkness,
Ruth lay still, waiting for Boaz to awaken. Time seemed to stretch as she waited, but eventually, Boaz stirred. He shifted in his sleep, then, with a startled gasp, he awoke, his eyes wide as he found himself not alone. "Who are you?" Boaz asked, his voice low and surprised. Ruth, though trembling, answered with a calm and steady voice. "I am Ruth, your servant. I have come to ask you to spread your cloak over me, for you are my kinsman redeemer." Boaz's eyes softened as he looked at her, and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He knew exactly what Ruth was asking. This was a bold and courageous request, but it was also a beautiful one grounded in trust and loyalty. Boaz had seen Ruth's integrity, her kindness, and her devotion to Naomi. He knew that she was a woman of great character.
"Blessed be you, Ruth, for your kindness," Boaz said gently. "You could have gone after younger men, those who could offer you more, but instead you have chosen me. I will do what you ask, for I am your kinsman redeemer. But there is one closer than I. I will go to him in the morning, and if he is willing to redeem you, then I will step aside. But if he refuses, I will redeem you myself." Ruth felt a wave of relief wash over her. Boaz's words were filled with compassion and honor. He was a man of integrity, a man who would do what was right. She had hoped for this moment, but hearing it from him made her heart swell with gratitude. Boaz reassured her that she was safe and that he would not rest until the matter was settled. "Stay here until morning," he said, "and I will make sure everything is taken care of." As the night passed, Ruth stayed by Boaz's side, both of them silently contemplating the future. For Ruth, the uncertainty of the past few months seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of hope and security. The path forward was still unclear, but she trusted in Boaz's integrity and in God's plan for their lives. When morning came, Ruth quietly returned to Naomi, her heart filled with anticipation. Naomi, who had been waiting anxiously, looked at Ruth's face and knew immediately that Boaz's response had been favorable. "Wait, my daughter," Naomi said with a smile, "until we see how this turns out. For Boaz will not rest until this matter is settled today." And so, as the day began to unfold, both women waited with bated breath, knowing that the outcome of the next few hours would change the course of their lives forever. The restoration they had longed for was within reach, and all that remained was for God's will to be revealed through Boaz's actions. The morning sun rose over Bethlehem, casting a warm glow across the fields and the town. Ruth returned to Naomi's house with the hope of her future heavy in her heart. As she entered the door, Naomi was already waiting, anxious yet hopeful. She could tell by the way Ruth held herself that the night had passed without calamity, but the uncertainty of what would come next still lingered in the air. "Tell me everything," Naomi said, her voice filled with both anticipation and concern. Ruth sat down beside her, her heart still racing from the events of the night. "I went to him, just as you said. I uncovered his feet and lay down beside him," Ruth began. "When he woke, I asked him to spread his cloak over me, for he is our kinsman redeemer." Naomi listened closely, her heart swelling with pride for Ruth's courage. "And what did Boaz say?" Ruth smiled, the weight of her nervousness lifting slightly. "He was kind and honorable. He said that he would redeem me if the closer kinsman redeemer refuses, but if the man accepts, he will step aside." Naomi's eyes sparkled with both relief and excitement. "Boaz is a man of integrity. I knew it. He will do what is right. Now, my daughter, wait. Rest today, and tomorrow we will see how it unfolds. I have faith that Boaz will not rest until this matter is settled today." Ruth, though filled with hope, felt a deep sense of uncertainty as the hours stretched into the day. There was still a chance that the nearer kinsman redeemer would refuse to take responsibility. The thought weighed heavily on her heart, for if he agreed, she would not be able to marry Boaz. And yet Ruth clung to the hope that Boaz's word would hold true. The integrity he had shown filled her with a confidence she had not known before. As Naomi and Ruth waited for the outcome, the morning turned to afternoon, and soon it was time for Boaz to meet with the closer kinsman redeemer. Naomi's faith in Boaz's honor remained steadfast, but there was still a deep worry beneath the surface. This was a turning point, one that could either restore their family's future or leave them in uncertainty once more. Boaz, after a day's work in the fields, went straight to the city gate where legal matters were settled. There he found the nearer kinsman redeemer sitting with the elders of the city. As Boaz approached, he nodded respectfully to the man. "Come, sit with me," Boaz said. "There is a matter we must discuss concerning the property of our relative, Elimelech, and the responsibility that comes with it." The closer kinsman redeemer looked at Boaz with curiosity, but also a sense of responsibility. "What is it you need, Boaz?" he asked. The air between them was filled with anticipation. Boaz wasted no time in presenting the situation. Naomi, who has returned to Bethlehem, is selling the land that belonged to Elimelech, our relative. You have the first right to redeem it. If you choose to redeem the land, you will also be responsible for taking Ruth, the widow of his son, as your wife to preserve the family name. The closer kinsman redeemer paused. The law was clear, but the situation was complicated. He hesitated before responding, his face revealing his internal struggle. "I would redeem the land, but taking Ruth as my wife would be another matter. This could affect the inheritance for my own children. I cannot take on that responsibility." Boaz, who had been watching the man's every move, nodded slowly. He understood that the decision was difficult. "In that case, I will redeem the land and take Ruth as my wife," Boaz said, his voice calm but firm. "I will restore Elimelech's family line, and I will fulfill the duty that is mine." The elders, who had been listening quietly, nodded in approval. They knew that Boaz's decision was the right one, that he was a man of integrity, willing to take on a responsibility that others had been unwilling to bear. The transaction was quickly settled, and Boaz's word was final. The closer kinsman redeemer renounced his right, and the property, along with Ruth's hand in marriage, was Boaz's to claim. With the legal matters settled, Boaz returned to Ruth and Naomi, his heart filled with joy. As he entered their home, Ruth and Naomi rose to greet him, anxious yet hopeful. Boaz smiled, the relief and triumph evident on his face. "It is done," Boaz said, his voice steady. "The closer kinsman redeemer has renounced his right, and I will redeem the land and take Ruth as my wife. We can now move forward in peace, knowing that our family has been restored." Ruth, overcome with emotion, embraced Boaz. Tears of gratitude filled her eyes as she realized that with Boaz's help, her life had been transformed. Naomi, too, felt the weight of the moment. The future of her family, once uncertain and bleak, was now filled with promise.
"Thank you, Boaz," Ruth said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "You have restored our family." Boaz nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. "It was not just for you, Ruth, but for all of us. We have been given the chance to rebuild, and now we will move forward together." As the days passed, Ruth and Boaz prepared for their marriage, while Naomi rejoiced in the knowledge that her family would live on. Their future was now secure, and they could all look ahead to the life they would build together. The restoration they had longed for was finally within their grasp. The day arrived when Boaz and Ruth were married, and the city of Bethlehem, though small, felt like it was filled with joy and hope. Their union, a testament to faith and loyalty, had brought not only restoration to their family, but also to the hearts of everyone who had witnessed their journey. Ruth and Boaz stood before the elders, surrounded by the warmth of the community that had supported them, and declared their vows. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Boaz, in his fine robes, stood tall and proud beside Ruth, who wore a modest yet elegant gown. They exchanged promises, not only to each other, but to the family that had brought them together. As Boaz placed the ring on Ruth's finger, he looked at her with admiration and love. "I promise to protect you, Ruth, and to honor you as my wife, just as I have honored the responsibility given to me by our family and God," Boaz said with sincerity. Ruth, her voice full of emotion, replied, "I will walk beside you, Boaz, as your wife and partner, for as long as we live. I will build a life with you, and together we will restore what was lost." The words were not just a promise of love, but a vow to uphold the values that had sustained them throughout their trials. They were no longer just two individuals bound by circumstance, but two people united by purpose, faith, and commitment. After the ceremony, the celebrations began. The people of Bethlehem rejoiced in the union of Ruth and Boaz, and for the first time in many years, Naomi felt at peace. Watching her daughter-in-law and Boaz together, she realized that her family had been fully restored, and that the future was now a bright and hopeful horizon. The next morning, Ruth and Boaz were surrounded by their loved ones as they began their new life together. Ruth, now officially a part of Boaz's family, found herself beginning to feel at home in the house she had once entered as a stranger. The bond she had with Boaz grew stronger every day, and with each passing moment, they worked together to create the life they had both longed for. Naomi, meanwhile, had become a joyful grandmother. Obed, her grandson, was growing quickly, and she took delight in every small milestone he reached. The house was filled with laughter as Obed's presence brought a sense of fullness to their once empty home. She marveled at the way the family had been restored. This little boy, who had been born from love and faith, had become the living symbol of all they had lost and regained. One evening, as the family sat together by the fire, Boaz looked at Ruth and Naomi with a smile of contentment. "We've built something beautiful here," he said, his voice full of gratitude.
Ruth nodded, her eyes filled with emotion. "I never imagined it would be like this. I thought I was returning to Bethlehem with nothing, but now I see how everything has been restored." Naomi, who had been quietly listening, felt her heart swell with pride. "This is the gift of faith, Ruth. We walked through the darkest days, but with each step we were never alone. You have shown us all what it means to trust and to love. This family, this home, it's all the result of that trust." As the evening drew to a close, the family settled into their comfortable routine. Boaz went out to work the land, while Ruth spent time preparing meals, sewing, and caring for their home. Naomi, though older now, found peace in the tasks she did around the house, always with a watchful eye on her growing grandson. It was during these quiet moments that Ruth reflected on all she had been through. She thought of the days when she had been a young widow in Moab, unsure of her future. She thought of her decision to follow Naomi to Bethlehem, a decision that had led her here. In her heart, she knew that her journey was not just about surviving, it was about thriving, about finding love, purpose, and family again. Days turned into weeks, and soon Ruth found herself pregnant with Boaz's child. The news was met with great joy by both Boaz and Naomi. It was a sign of new beginnings, of hope for the future. The family was growing, and their story was now one of fulfillment rather than loss. As the months passed, Ruth's belly grew, and so did her love for Boaz and Naomi. They had become more than just a family. They had become a testament to the strength of loyalty, the power of faith, and the restoration that comes when one chooses to believe in something greater than oneself. Ruth, in the quiet moments when she and Boaz were alone, would look at him with a sense of awe. "I never thought this would be my life, but now it is everything I ever dreamed of." Boaz would smile and kiss her gently. "This is only the beginning, Ruth. Together, we will continue to build this life, and the legacy of our family will endure for generations." And so, with their love as their foundation, the family of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi began to flourish. The past, filled with sorrow and loss, had paved the way for a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The restoration they had longed for was not only realized, it was lived every day, in every moment of joy, of laughter, and of faith. As the months passed, Ruth's pregnancy progressed, and with each passing day the anticipation of the new life they were about to welcome grew. The joy in Boaz and Ruth's home was palpable, and even Naomi, despite her age, was filled with a new sense of purpose as she helped prepare for the arrival of the child. The once desolate house, which had been filled only with sorrow, now echoed with hope and the promise of a brighter future. Ruth and Boaz's love continued to grow stronger, and each day spent together was a reminder of the faith they had in one another and in God. Boaz worked the land with dedication, ensuring that everything was ready for the family's future. Ruth, now more confident in her role as a wife and soon-to-be mother, found solace in the simple joys of homemaking. Naomi, who had once carried the weight of grief, now found peace in her daily routine, caring for her family and watching Obed, her beloved grandson, grow. One afternoon, as Ruth rested in the shade of the tree near the house, Naomi sat beside her, her eyes soft with pride as she watched her daughter-in-law. "You have become everything I hoped for, Ruth," Naomi said, her voice full of warmth. "I never thought I would see this day, but now I see how God has worked through us all." Ruth smiled at Naomi, taking her hand. "I owe so much of this to you, Naomi. Your wisdom, your love. Without you, I wouldn't be who I am today." Naomi gently patted Ruth's hand. "You are strong, Ruth. Your journey has not been easy, but you have walked through it with faith, and that is why we are here now. This child will carry the legacy of love, faith, and perseverance." As the days drew closer to Ruth's due date, the whole village of Bethlehem seemed to share in the excitement. Word had spread about Ruth's story, about her loyalty to Naomi, her courage in leaving her homeland, and her unwavering trust in God. People saw Ruth as a woman of great character, and they rejoiced in the blessings that were now unfolding before them. Boaz, for his part, was eager to welcome the child, and he continued to work tirelessly to provide for their growing family. He took great pride in knowing that he had restored not only Ruth and Naomi's family, but also his own. Boaz had seen firsthand how faith and action could change lives, and he had every intention of continuing to lead by example. On a crisp evening, as Ruth felt the first signs of labor, Boaz stayed close by her. He had made preparations for their home to be filled with warmth and care, and Naomi was ready to assist Ruth in any way she needed. The three of them worked together as the moment approached. Ruth's labor was long, but her strength never faltered. Through each wave of pain, she found comfort in Boaz's hand holding hers, and in Naomi's steady voice offering words of encouragement. It was a testament to the journey they had walked together, to the strength of their bond as a family. When finally the child was born, it was a moment of pure joy. Ruth, exhausted but filled with an overwhelming sense of love, held the newborn in her arms.
The child was healthy, a perfect blend of Ruth and Boaz's hope and dreams for the future. Naomi, with tears in her eyes, looked at the baby boy and whispered, "This is Obed, the promise fulfilled." Boaz stood beside Ruth, his heart full. "We have been blessed," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This child is not just ours, he is a blessing to all of us. He is the future of our family and the future of all that we've built together." The community of Bethlehem celebrated with them. The people saw Obed as a symbol of restoration and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through. Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi had become the heart of the community, and Obed was the living testament to the power of faith, loyalty, and love. In the months that followed, Ruth and Boaz continued to build their life together. Obed grew quickly, and with each passing day, their love for him deepened. Naomi, though older and wiser now, still found great joy in watching her grandson play, laugh, and grow. Her heart swelled with pride as she saw the family she had worked so hard to restore flourishing in front of her eyes.
As Obed grew, Boaz and Ruth began to speak of the legacy they were building for him. They would teach him the values that had sustained them through the hardest times: faith in God, love for family, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Obed, they knew, would carry their story forward, passing it on to future generations. And so, the family continued to grow in love and strength. The restoration that had begun with Ruth's decision to follow Naomi and with Boaz's willingness to redeem their family now reached its fulfillment. The life they had dreamed of was now theirs, and they were filled with a deep sense of peace and contentment. In the heart of Bethlehem, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and little Obed lived a life of faith, love, and hope, knowing that the restoration they had experienced would echo for generations to come. The road they had traveled together, though long and filled with hardship, had led them to a place of true peace, and they were finally home. As Obed grew, so did the love and devotion that surrounded him. Ruth and Boaz watched with pride as their son blossomed into a curious, joyful child. Naomi, too, found herself drawn to the little boy more and more each day, her heart swelling with joy at his laughter and playful energy. There was a sense of completeness in their lives now, a completeness that had been absent for so long. Ruth and Boaz had always dreamed of a life like this, one where their family was whole, where their love for each other and for their community could flourish. The simple moments they spent together, working in the fields, sharing meals, and teaching Obed the ways of their faith, were the true fulfillment of the promises they had made to each other and to God. Boaz, though a man of great wealth, did not take his prosperity for granted. Every day he worked diligently to ensure that his family's future was secure, but he never forgot the struggles they had faced. He was determined to live out his faith through his actions, giving generously to those in need and ensuring that the land they had inherited would continue to prosper for generations. One day, as Boaz and Ruth worked side by side in their fields, Ruth turned to him, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "Boaz, do you ever think about how far we've come? From the moment I first came to Bethlehem, it seemed like everything was so uncertain. I had no idea what the future held. But now we have everything we could ever need." Boaz smiled warmly at her, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I think about it every day, Ruth. We have been given so much, and none of it would have been possible without your faith, without your love for Naomi and your trust in God." Ruth looked out over the fields, the golden barley swaying in the breeze. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this. I thought I would always be a widow, always lost in grief. But with you, I found a new life, and with Obed, I see a future I never thought I'd have." Boaz took her hand gently. "Together, we've built something beautiful.
We've restored not just our family, but a whole future, Obed's future." As they walked home together, hand in hand, Ruth's thoughts turned to the generations that would follow. Obed, their beloved son, would one day be a man, and he would carry with him the legacy of their faith and love. Ruth knew that he would not only carry their bloodline, but also their values, the strength of character that had sustained them all these years.
Later that evening, as they sat down to dinner, Naomi joined them, her face reflecting the deep satisfaction she felt watching her family grow. Obed, now a few years older, was eagerly showing his grandparents the new words he had learned. His face lit up with excitement. "Look, Grandma, look what I can do," he said, running around the room with a big grin. Naomi laughed and pulled him into her lap, her heart full of love. "I can see, my dear, you're growing so fast." As they shared their meal, Naomi felt a deep sense of peace. She had witnessed so much loss in her life, so much grief, but now she was witnessing a beautiful restoration. Ruth, once a foreigner and widow, was now a beloved daughter, and Boaz, once a lonely man bound by duty, was now a husband and father, leading their family with integrity. The restoration they had all longed for had come to fruition, not just for Ruth and Naomi, but for the entire family. The land, the home, the love they shared, and the faith they lived by, all of it was a testament to the power of perseverance, of never losing hope, and of trusting in God's plan. One afternoon, as Boaz walked through the fields, surveying the land, he paused for a moment, looking out over the land that had once been a symbol of their hardship, but now represented their prosperity. He thought of everything that had brought them to this point, the hard years, the moments of doubt, and the steps they had taken in faith. Now, as he looked at the land, he saw a future filled with possibilities. He returned to the house that evening, his heart full of gratitude. Sitting down at the dinner table with Ruth and Naomi, he smiled and said, "This land, this family, it's all a gift from God." Ruth reached over and took his hand, "And it's a gift we'll share with everyone who needs it. We've been blessed, and we'll bless others in return." Boaz nodded. "Yes, this legacy isn't just for us, it's for all of Bethlehem and for all who come after us." And so, as the years passed, Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi continued to build their lives together. Their home became a place of warmth, hospitality, and faith. Obed grew stronger and wiser, and the lessons of his parents and grandparents shaped him into a man of character and integrity. The family continued to thrive, guided by the principles that had carried them through their darkest days: faith, love, and perseverance. The restoration that had begun with Ruth's decision to follow Naomi and Boaz's willingness to redeem their family had brought not only new life to them, but it also restored the hope and legacy of a family that had been nearly lost. The story of their journey, of their faith, of their resilience would live on for generations to come. And as they sat together, year after year, their hearts full of love and gratitude, Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi knew one thing for sure: that the true legacy they had built was not just in the land they had restored, but in the love they had shared and the family they had created. A family that would continue to grow and prosper in faith and love for generations to come.
The years continued to pass quietly in Bethlehem, and with each day, Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi's family grew stronger, more united, and ever more deeply rooted in faith. Their journey, which had begun with immense hardship, had transformed into one of unimaginable grace. And as Obed continued to grow, so did the legacy that had been passed down through generations: faith, love, and loyalty that had brought them from a place of loss to one of restoration. Ruth's life, once filled with uncertainty and sorrow, was now rich with purpose. Each day, she woke beside Boaz with a sense of peace she had never known. Their love had flourished, not just as a bond between husband and wife, but as a partnership
built on shared values and a deep connection to the land and the people of Bethlehem. Their home, filled with the warmth of family and the sound of Obed's laughter, was a sanctuary of love, joy, and faith. Boaz, now older and wiser, had watched as his family had grown not only in numbers, but in character. He had always been a man of integrity, but seeing Ruth's unwavering faith and dedication to their family had taught him even more about the power of love and loyalty. He had redeemed not just a piece of land, but a family, a legacy, and a future. Obed, the son of Ruth and Boaz, was growing quickly. His boundless curiosity and eagerness to learn were traits that both his parents and his grandmother cherished. Every day was a new adventure for Obed, and with each step, he brought new joy to the household. Naomi, who had once been consumed by grief and loss, found herself filled with a quiet peace as she watched her grandson grow into a young boy who embodied the hope and love that had been restored to their family. One evening, as they sat together around the fire, Ruth spoke softly, reflecting on the journey they had taken. "Do you remember, Boaz," she began, "how uncertain everything was when we first came to Bethlehem? I thought I had nothing left to give, and yet here we are, with a home, a family, and a future." Boaz smiled at her, his hand gently resting on hers. "I remember, Ruth. I remember how difficult the journey was, but I also remember the strength you showed. You never gave up. You were a beacon of hope when all seemed lost. And now, look at what we've built together. It's more than I ever imagined possible." Naomi, sitting across from them, nodded in agreement. "We've come so far, all of us. I've lived through so much pain, but now my heart is full. You have both shown me that there is always hope, even in the darkest of times." The fire crackled softly in the background, and the warmth of the moment filled the room. Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi shared a quiet understanding that their story was one of not just survival, but of flourishing. They had rebuilt not just their home, but their lives, and they had done so together with love, faith, and a deep commitment to each other. As they sat in the warmth of the fire, Obed came running in, his face bright with excitement. "Look, Grandma! Look what I made!" he exclaimed, holding up a small wooden toy he had carved. His small hands were covered in dirt, evidence of his creative efforts. Naomi laughed and took him into her arms. "You're growing so fast, Obed," she said, her voice full of love.
One day, you'll be telling your own story, just like we tell ours. Obed smiled up at her, his eyes shining with excitement. "I'll tell the story of how we all worked together, right, Grandma?" "Yes, my dear," Naomi said softly. "You'll carry this story with you, and one day you'll pass it on to your children. The story of how love and faith restored our family." Boaz looked at Ruth, his heart full of pride and gratitude. "We've built something that will last, Ruth. A legacy that will live on, not just through Obed, but through all who come after him. Our faith, our love, and the hope that brought us together will carry through every generation." Ruth smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "And we'll continue to teach him, just as Naomi taught me. The lessons of faith, loyalty, and love. That's the foundation of everything we've built." As the night stretched on, the family sat together, united by the bond they had forged. Each day was a reminder that their journey was far from over, that the work of restoring their family, their community, and their future was an ongoing process, one that would continue through the generations. Obed, though still young, was learning the lessons that would guide him through his own life. And as Naomi held him close, she knew that the legacy of faith, love, and restoration would live on in him. Their story was no longer just a tale of sorrow and loss, but one of triumph, resilience, and hope.
And as the fire flickered and the stars shone above Bethlehem, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed knew that their legacy had only just begun. Together, they had restored what had been lost, and together they would ensure that the story of their family would continue to inspire and guide future generations. Years had passed since Ruth and Boaz had married, and the family's life in Bethlehem continued to thrive. Obed, their son, was no longer the curious little child, but was growing into a thoughtful and wise young boy. His laughter filled their home, and his energy brought life to the community. Naomi, once a woman broken by loss, had become a loving grandmother, her heart healed and full of pride for her grandson. Ruth and Boaz's love for each other and for their family was evident in every gesture, every word they shared. But their journey was not just about the present. It was about the future they had built, the legacy they had created together, and the generations that would follow. As Obed matured, Ruth and Boaz began to reflect on the lessons they had learned and the faith that had carried them through their darkest days. One evening, as the family gathered around the table, Boaz spoke with a quiet authority that only a man of his integrity could possess. "Ruth, Naomi, we have come a long way since we first met. I remember how uncertain things seemed, how we weren't sure where we were going. But look at us now. We've not only rebuilt our family, but we've built a foundation for the generations to come." Ruth smiled warmly, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes, Boaz, I never imagined that my journey would bring me here. With you, with Obed, and with a future so full of promise." Naomi, seated next to Obed, looked down at her grandson and felt a deep sense of peace. "It's amazing how far we've come, how much we've gained. When I returned to Bethlehem, I was empty. But now, my heart is full, overflowing with love for all of you."
And Obed, he is the fruit of everything we've worked for. He is our future. Obed, who had been quietly listening, looked up at Naomi with curiosity. "Grandma, what do you mean? Why is it so important that I carry on the story?" Naomi's eyes sparkled as she smiled down at him. "You, my dear, are the continuation of our legacy. You carry with you the faith and love that restored this family, that healed the wounds we once carried. You will tell our story to the next generation, and in doing so, you will remind them that no matter how dark the past may seem, God's plan is always greater than our struggles." Obed, who had been quietly listening, looked up at Naomi with curiosity. "Grandma, what do you mean? Why is it so important that I carry on the story?" Naomi's eyes sparkled as she smiled down at him. "You, my dear, are the continuation of our legacy. You carry with you the faith and love that restored this family, that healed the wounds we once carried. You will tell our story to the next generation, and in doing so, you will remind them that no matter how dark the past may seem, God's plan is always greater than our struggles." Obed, now old enough to understand the weight of her words, nodded. "I will remember, Grandma. I will tell everyone how we came together, how we rebuilt our family." Ruth's voice was soft but firm. "We will teach you, Obed, just as we were taught. We will teach you to trust in God, to love deeply, and to persevere through challenges. That is the foundation of everything we've built, and that is the legacy we want to pass on to you." Boaz added, his voice filled with pride, "Obed, you are the living proof of all that we've been through. You are the fulfillment of the promises we made, not only to ourselves, but to God. We've been redeemed, and so will you carry on that redemption in your life."
As the evening grew quiet, Ruth reflected on how far they had come, from the heartbreak of losing their loved ones to the hope that now filled their home. The road to restoration had been long and difficult, but the love and faith they had shared had guided them every step of the way. Ruth and Boaz had shown Obed what it meant to be faithful, to be loyal, and to put others before oneself. And in return, they knew he would grow up to be a man who would pass those same values on to his own children, ensuring that the cycle of faith and restoration would continue for generations to come. The following days were filled with laughter and joy, and in every conversation, every prayer, and every moment spent together, the family story was being written anew. And though their trials were over, Ruth and Boaz knew that their greatest legacy was not in the material things they had built, but in the love, faith, and strength they had shared with one another. As time went on, Obed grew into a young man of great wisdom, just as his parents had hoped. His heart was full of kindness, and his faith was unshakable. The lessons of his parents and his grandmother's love had shaped him into someone who understood the importance of family, of restoration, and of the unbreakable bond that love and faith could create. And so the legacy of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi continued to live on, not just through Obed, but through every story they told, every lesson they shared, and every new beginning they embraced. Their story, one of redemption, of overcoming loss, and of trusting in God's plan, became a guiding light for future generations. As the sun set over Bethlehem, the family gathered together once more, their hearts full of gratitude and love. Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed had found their way through the darkest of times, and now they stood together in the light of a future they had restored. And so the story of their family, woven together with faith, love, and perseverance, would continue to be passed down, ensuring that the hope they had fought for would never fade, and that the legacy they had built would endure for generations to come.
As Obed grew older, the house in Bethlehem continued to be filled with laughter and warmth. Ruth and Boaz, now older and wiser, found themselves reflecting on the life they had built together. What had once seemed like a distant dream, restoring their family, finding peace, and building a future, had become their reality. The restoration of their family was not just in the land they had reclaimed or the legacy they had restored, but in the daily moments of love and joy that filled their home. Obed, now a young boy with a curious and bright spirit, had inherited the best qualities from his parents and grandmother. He was learning the ways of the land from Boaz, his strong hands already working alongside his father. Ruth, ever the nurturing soul, taught him the values of faith, loyalty, and love, the very principles that had guided them through their darkest days. One evening, as the family sat together around a large wooden table, a fire crackling in the hearth, Boaz looked at Ruth, his heart full. "Do you remember, Ruth, when we first came to Bethlehem, when we had nothing, and it seemed as though we were just lost in the world?" Ruth smiled, her eyes softening as she thought back to those early days. "I do. I never imagined I would find such peace and purpose here. I thought my life would always be marked by loss, but now I see how God has brought us through it all." Naomi, seated beside them, nodded slowly. "I too remember those days. I came back to Bethlehem broken, empty. I thought I would never find happiness again. But look at us now. Our family, our home, our future, it's all been restored, and it's more than I could have ever hoped for." Boaz looked over at Obed, who was busy drawing pictures on a piece of parchment. "And it's not just about us, it's about the future. Obed will carry this legacy forward. He will be the one to tell our story, to teach his children about faith, about love, and about perseverance." Ruth,
her heart swelling with pride, reached out and gently touched Boaz's hand. Yes, Obed will carry our story, but he will also create his own. His future is his own to shape, and we will help guide him along the way. Obed, hearing his name, looked up and smiled brightly. "What are you two talking about?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "We're talking about the legacy we've built together, about how you'll continue our story and make it your own." Obed's eyes widened with excitement. "I will make our story the best story ever," he said confidently, his youthful determination shining through. "And I'll make sure everyone knows how God helped us all." Naomi chuckled softly, her heart filled with emotion. "You already have the spirit of your parents in you, Obed. You are the continuation of everything we've been through. Your future is bright, my dear." As the days passed, the family's life continued to blossom. Ruth and Boaz worked side by side, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. Naomi, though no longer a young woman, found joy in watching Obed grow and in knowing that her family had been restored. Their home was full of light, laughter, and love, and it was a place where all who entered felt the presence of something sacred, a restoration that went beyond the material, something spiritual and everlasting.
One afternoon, Boaz and Ruth took Obed to the fields, showing him the land they had worked so hard to restore. Boaz, his weathered hands resting on the wooden plow, turned to Obed and said, "This land, my son, is more than just soil and grain. It's the product of faith, of hard work, and of believing in God's plan. It's a legacy that will continue to grow, just like you," Ruth added softly, "and it's a reminder of what we've been through. When things seemed hopeless, we held on to our faith, and that faith brought us here. Never forget that, Obed." As Obed looked out over the fields, his heart swelled with pride. He understood, more than ever, the weight of the responsibility he carried. The legacy of his family, of love, faith, and restoration, was something he would carry forward, something that would guide him in every decision he made. The years continued to pass, and with each year, the family grew stronger. Obed, now a young man, had become a pillar of strength and wisdom in Bethlehem. He worked the land with his father, learning the ways of the harvest, but he also carried the values of faith and family that his parents had instilled in him. Boaz and Ruth, now in the later years of their lives, looked on with pride as their son continued the work they had started. As the sun set over Bethlehem, casting a warm golden glow over the fields, Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi sat together watching Obed work the land. In that quiet moment, they all understood something profound. The restoration they had longed for was not just about rebuilding what had been lost, but about creating something lasting, a family rooted in love, faith, and the hope of a future that would endure. In the years to come, Obed would become the man who would tell their story, ensuring that the lessons they had learned would be passed down for generations. The family's legacy of restoration would continue to thrive, a testament to the power of faith and love that had guided them through their darkest days and led them to this place of peace. The road that had once seemed so uncertain had, in the end, led them to a place of fulfillment, a family restored, a future secured, and a legacy of faith and love that would endure forever. As the seasons changed, Obed grew into a young man of great character, embodying the values his parents, Ruth and Boaz, had instilled in him. Boaz and Ruth had witnessed the transformation of their once broken family into a thriving, close-knit unit. Their home, nestled in the heart of Bethlehem, was a symbol of everything they had worked for: love, faith, and the power of redemption. Naomi, now older but full of peace, watched from the sidelines as her family flourished. The pain of the past had been washed away by the love and devotion that surrounded her. Boaz, though still active and hard-working, was beginning to feel the weight of his years. But when he looked at Obed, he saw the future.
He saw in him the continuation of everything they had built, and that knowledge filled him with pride. Ruth, ever the nurturing soul, guided Obed in his journey toward adulthood, teaching him the importance of kindness, generosity, and the faith that had sustained their family. One warm afternoon, as the harvest season approached, Boaz called Obed to his side while they worked the land together. It was a tradition in their family for father and son to spend time working side by side, passing on knowledge that could only be learned through experience. Obed, now strong and capable, felt the weight of his father's expectations, but also the deep love that Boaz had always shown him.
"Obed," Boaz said as they worked, "you've grown into a fine young man. I've watched you, and I see so much of your mother in you, her strength, her heart, and her faith. But you also carry the legacy of our family, and it's a legacy that must not be forgotten." Obed, wiping the sweat from his brow, nodded, listening intently to his father's words. He had always known that the family's history, the sacrifices they had made, and the love that had bound them together were important. But hearing it from his father made it even more real, more tangible. "I will carry the legacy, Father," Obed said, his voice filled with conviction. "I will live by the faith you and Mother have shown me. I will make sure our story is never forgotten." Boaz smiled, his heart full of pride. "I know you will, my son. And as you continue this journey, remember that it's not just about the land, the inheritance, or the material things. It's about the love that binds us, the faith that holds us together, and the legacy we leave behind for future generations." As the harvest season progressed, the community of Bethlehem gathered in celebration. The work of the fields had been fruitful, and the entire village felt the joy of prosperity. Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi joined the festivities, their hearts full of gratitude for the blessings they had received. Obed, now standing tall and proud, was the embodiment of their journey, his presence a symbol of restoration and hope for the future. That night, as the family sat together under the stars, Naomi reflected on all that had come to pass. The grief that had once consumed her was now replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. Ruth had followed her faithfully, and together they had restored a family that once seemed lost. And now, through Obed, the future of their legacy was secure. She turned to Ruth and Boaz, a soft smile on her lips. "We've come so far, haven't we? From the darkest days of loss and despair to this, our family, our future. And now Obed will carry on our story. He will share the lessons we learned and the love we've found." Ruth's eyes glistened with tears of joy. "Yes, Naomi, we've come so far, and the journey is not over. Obed will be the one to tell our story, and through him, we will live on in every generation." Boaz, looking at Obed with pride, added, "Our legacy will live in him. His children will hear the story of how we were redeemed, how our faith and love restored this family, and they will carry it forward, just as we have." Obed, though still young, understood the weight of his parents' words. He looked up at the stars, his heart full of gratitude for the life he had been given. He knew that he carried the past with him, but he also understood that he had the power to shape the future. And that future, he knew, would be rooted in the same faith and love that had guided his family through the hardest times. In the quiet of the night, as the fire flickered softly in front of them, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed sat together, their hearts united. They had rebuilt their family from the ground up, and they had done so with faith, love, and perseverance. The restoration they had longed for had come to fruition, and the legacy they had created would continue to thrive for generations to come.
As the stars twinkled above, the family knew that their journey was far from over. They had restored what had been lost, and in doing so, had secured a future that was full of promise.
The story of Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed would be passed down for generations, reminding all who heard it that love and faith could overcome even the greatest of hardships, and that restoration was always possible, no matter how impossible it may seem. And so, as the years went by, the family continued to live in peace, knowing that the legacy they had built would endure for generations to come. The restoration of their family was not just a chapter in their lives, it was a story that would continue to inspire, to heal, and to remind everyone that with faith, love, and perseverance, anything was possible. The years flowed by gently in Bethlehem, and the home that Ruth and Boaz had built continued to flourish. Their love for one another had deepened with each passing day, and Obed, now a young man, had become a source of pride not only for his parents, but for the entire community. Naomi, once sorrowful and broken by loss, now found her heart filled with contentment as she watched her grandson grow. Obed had inherited not only his parents' resilience, but also the warmth and wisdom of Naomi. He was learning the ways of the land from Boaz and the importance of community from Ruth and Naomi. As he worked alongside his father, tending to the fields, he also learned the lessons of leadership, responsibility, and compassion. But even more, Obed was learning the story of his family, the story of how love, faith, and perseverance had restored what had been lost. Ruth and Boaz had always been devoted to Obed's upbringing, ensuring that he understood the sacrifices that had been made to create the life they now had. Their teachings were not just about the practicalities of farming or the rules of the land, but about the deeper things: faith, integrity, and the strength that comes from standing firm in the face of hardship. And Obed, with his keen understanding and his strong heart, absorbed these lessons with grace. One evening, as the harvest season came to a close and the family sat around the table, Naomi looked at Obed with a soft smile. She had seen him grow from the small child she had once cradled in her arms into the young man who now helped guide their family. There was a quiet pride in her heart as she watched him. "Obed," Naomi said gently, "you've grown into such a fine young man. Every day I see your father in you, and your mother too. You carry their strength and their faith in your heart." Obed smiled, though there was a quiet humility in his eyes. "I have been taught well," he said. "You all have shown me what it means to live with purpose, to live with faith. I will carry your legacy with me always." Ruth, who had been watching her son with a deep, knowing gaze, took his hand in hers. "Obed, my son, you are the living proof of everything we've worked for. Your future is bright, but it is also your responsibility. You will carry the values of our family into the world, and you will teach others the importance of love, faith, and perseverance." Boaz, seated across from them, smiled at their family. His heart was full, knowing that the legacy they had fought so hard to rebuild was now in Obed's hands. "Your mother is right," he said. "You have not only learned from us, but you will also teach us. Your wisdom and faith will be the foundation of our future."
The evening was calm and peaceful, the quiet sound of the wind outside the window as the family shared a simple meal. As Ruth and Boaz sat in contentment, Naomi's thoughts turned to the generations that would come after Obed. She had always worried about the future, about what would happen to her family after she was gone. But now, looking at her grandson, she felt an overwhelming peace. Their story, her story, had come full circle, and she knew that the legacy they had created would live on, not just through Obed, but through all the lives he would touch. Over the next few months, the world outside Bethlehem began to change.
The news of the prosperity and peace that had settled over Ruth and Boaz's family reached the neighboring villages. People spoke of how a foreign widow had come to Bethlehem and through her faith had restored her family. They spoke of Boaz's generosity and integrity, and how together Ruth and Boaz had not only built a home, but had created a future. One day, a traveler came to the house. He was an elder from a neighboring village, and when he heard the story of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi, he wanted to see it for himself. He had heard of Obed's wisdom and strength and wanted to ask him for guidance. The traveler was amazed by the family's unity, their humility, and the legacy they had built. "Your family's story is one of great strength," the elder said as he spoke to Boaz, Ruth, and Naomi. "It is not just the land you've restored, but the faith, the love, and the hope that you've planted here. You have shown us that even the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." Naomi, sitting quietly, smiled to herself. She had never imagined that their story would become such an inspiration to others, that it would be a beacon of hope for those who were struggling with their own hardships. The journey that had once seemed so full of sorrow now seemed like a story of redemption and renewal. As Obed grew into a man, his leadership became more evident. He was not only a strong worker like his father, but he also became a voice of wisdom in the community. He taught the younger generation the values that had been passed down to him, ensuring that the story of his family would continue to inspire and guide. One day, as Obed stood on the threshold of the family home, looking out over the land his parents had worked so hard to restore, he reflected on everything they had been through. He thought of the struggles, the sacrifices, and the faith that had guided them. And as he stood there looking at the horizon, he felt the weight of the responsibility he now carried. "My story is not my own," Obed thought. "It is the story of my family, of all we have endured, and of the faith that has sustained us. And I will pass that story on so that it never fades." As the years went by, Obed continued to lead with the values that had been taught to him. He remained humble, compassionate, and steadfast in his faith. And when his time came, he passed the legacy on to his own children, ensuring that the story of Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed would live on for generations to come. The legacy of restoration had come full circle. It was no longer just a story of the past, but one that would continue to inspire and guide the future. And in the quiet of the evening, as the family gathered together once more, they knew that the hope they had fought for would never be lost. It would live on in every generation for as long as the land continued to flourish and the story of their family was told.
The years passed peacefully in Bethlehem, and the home that Ruth and Boaz had built was now a sanctuary of love, wisdom, and hope. Naomi, now in the later years of her life, had witnessed her family not only survive but flourish. Obed, now a young man of stature and respect in the village, had become the embodiment of everything they had fought for: the resilience of faith, the power of love, and the strength of family. Boaz and Ruth, though their hair had grayed and their faces had softened with age, still carried the same determination in their hearts. They watched Obed with immense pride, knowing that their work was not just about rebuilding their lives, but creating a foundation for the future. One early spring afternoon, Boaz stood on the edge of the fields, looking out over the land that had once seemed barren and empty. Now it stretched out before him, full, abundant, and thriving. He had worked alongside his family to restore it, to make it their own. But now, as his eyes traced the horizon, he realized that their work was never just about the land. It was about the legacy they were building, a legacy that would outlast them all. As Boaz watched the field sway gently in the wind, he turned to Ruth, who had joined him. Her presence, as always, was a comfort and a grounding force in his life. She smiled at him, sensing the thoughts that were running through his mind. "I remember when we first came here,"
Ruth said softly. "We had nothing but each other and our faith in God. But now look at us. We've built a life, a home, a family, and a future." Boaz nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "It's more than I ever imagined, Ruth. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. But the work isn't done. Obed will carry this legacy, and he will teach his children the same values we've passed on to him. We've laid the foundation, but the future will continue to grow, just as the land does." Ruth took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We've done our part, and now Obed will take the lessons we've taught him and build his own legacy. It's an unbroken circle of faith, love, and perseverance." As they walked back to their home, Boaz and Ruth exchanged a glance, knowing that their journey was far from over. While they may have laid the groundwork for their family's future, it was up to the next generation to carry that legacy forward. The love they had cultivated, the lessons they had learned, and the faith they had shared would endure through the ages, carried by those who followed. That evening, after the day's work was done, the family gathered together in the warmth of their home. Naomi, now sitting in her favorite chair by the fire, looked at her son and daughter-in-law, her heart full of gratitude. She had lived through so much, through loss, through heartache, but now, with Ruth and Boaz by her side, and Obed growing into a man of integrity and strength, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. "Look at us," Naomi said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We've come so far. I thought I had lost everything, but now I see how God has restored our family. Through the pain and the tears, He has given us a future."
Ruth smiled, her eyes reflecting the love she felt for her mother-in-law. "We've all been through so much, Naomi, but we've held on to each other, and that's what has carried us. That's what has given us this new life." Obed, who had been quietly listening, looked at his parents and his grandmother. "I've learned so much from all of you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I've learned the importance of faith, of love, and of never giving up. I will carry these lessons with me for the rest of my life." Naomi, tears welling in her eyes, looked at Obed and nodded. "You are the continuation of our story, Obed. You are the promise of what's to come. You will take what we've built and carry it forward, just as we carried it forward before us." Boaz placed his hand on Obed's shoulder. "The work we've done is not just for us. It's for you, for the generations that will follow, and for the future of our family. It is our hope, our faith, and our love that will endure, and it will be passed down to you." The room fell quiet, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the soft crackling of the fire. The love between them all was palpable, a silent but powerful force that held them together. As the years continued to pass, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed continued to live in peace. The family's legacy grew, and the lessons they had passed down remained a guiding light for all who followed. Obed eventually took over the land, building upon the foundation his parents and grandparents had established, and he became a respected leader in Bethlehem. Ruth and Boaz, now in their later years, looked on with pride as their son carried on their work. Naomi, too, found peace, knowing that the legacy she had fought so hard to restore was in good hands. Their family had been fully restored, and their story, one of faith, love, and redemption, had come full circle. And so the legacy of Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed lived on not just in the land they had restored, but in the hearts of future generations. Their story would continue to inspire, to heal, and to remind everyone that through faith, love, and perseverance, even the darkest of times could lead to the brightest of futures. The unbroken circle of their legacy would endure, for, as long as there was faith in God, love for family, and the hope of a future that was always possible, no matter the hardships that may come. The sun set over Bethlehem once more, casting a warm golden light over the hills and fields that had once been barren and lifeless, but now thrived under the care of Ruth, Boaz, and Obed. The village, once filled with whispers of struggle and despair, now buzzed with the sound of prosperity and joy. Families who had seen the hardships of famine and loss now looked toward the future with hope, their lives forever shaped by the faith and perseverance of one remarkable family. Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi sat together on the porch of their home, the cool evening breeze gently stirring the air. Obed, now a young man of strong character and faith, was helping the neighbors with their crops, embodying the lessons he had learned from his parents and grandmother. The family had not only rebuilt their lives, but they had restored the very fabric of their community, planting seeds of hope for generations to come.
As Ruth and Boaz looked out over the land they had once thought lost forever, they could not help but reflect on how far they had come. The long road of suffering and uncertainty had brought them here, to this peaceful moment, surrounded by the love of family and the strength of a community that had come together. It was more than they had ever hoped for, more than they had dreamed possible in the darkest times. Boaz, ever the man of action, turned to Ruth, his hand resting gently on hers. "I look at what we've built, Ruth, and I can hardly believe it. I remember the day we met, when everything seemed uncertain, when I thought I would never find someone to share my life with. But then you came into my life, and with you came hope. We've built something beautiful, something that will last long after we're gone." Ruth smiled, her eyes full of gratitude. "We have, Boaz, but it's not just about what we've built. It's about how we've built it, together, with faith, with love, and with God's guidance. We've shown that no matter how broken something is, with His help, it can always be restored." Naomi, who had been quietly listening, looked at her daughter-in-law and son with a soft smile. Though the years had taken their toll on her, and the weight of sorrow had shaped her into a woman of wisdom and strength, she felt at peace. She had lost so much, but in return she had gained more than she could ever have imagined. Ruth and Boaz had restored her heart, and Obed had become the living symbol of God's faithfulness. "I never thought I would see the day when my family would be whole again," Naomi said, her voice full of emotion. "But here we are, with a future that is brighter than I could have ever dreamed. Obed is the continuation of our legacy, and he will carry our story forward, just as we carried it before him." Obed, now approaching them with a smile on his face, nodded respectfully. "I will carry your story, Grandma, and I will ensure that our family's legacy of faith, love, and restoration is passed down to my children and beyond." Ruth looked at her son with pride. "And you will, Obed. You are the living proof of everything we've worked for. You will continue this journey just as we did before you." Boaz placed his arm around Ruth's shoulders, pulling her close. "We've built a family. And not just a family, but a legacy of restoration, of love, of perseverance. That's the true inheritance we leave behind. Not the land, not the wealth, but the lessons we've learned and the faith we've shared." As the years passed, Obed took up his father's mantle, continuing the work of the land, strengthening the bonds in their community, and raising a family of his own. The legacy of Ruth and Boaz, of Naomi's strength, was passed down through each generation.
Their story became a legend in Bethlehem, a story of redemption that was told and retold, inspiring all who heard it.
And so the family's legacy endured, not just in the fields they worked, the homes they built, or the wealth they amassed, but in the hearts and minds of those who lived by the values they had upheld. The story of Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed was a testament to the power of faith, loyalty, and love. A reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, there is always a way to restore what was lost and to rebuild what was broken. In the end, their story lived on, not just in the land of Bethlehem, but in the hearts of all who believed in the power of restoration. Their legacy was eternal, passed from one generation to the next, a beacon of hope that would never fade. And so the circle of restoration continued, unbroken, through the ages, a living testament to the enduring power of love and faith. And in that quiet moment, as the stars shone above Bethlehem, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and Obed knew that their family's legacy would live forever, etched into the fabric of time, woven into the hearts of all who came after them. The restoration was complete, and the future was bright.